Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the crisp, clean scent of damp cotton sheets snapping on a clothesline in the summer breeze, or the unmistakable heavy clinking sound of a rotary phone dial spinning back into place. Welcome back, my friends. Today we are going to take a slow, comforting journey back to the 1960s, to a time when life demanded a little more patience and a lot less money. We are going to explore 20 forgotten frugal habits from our American childhoods that, looking back now, felt like the purest form of true wealth. I invite you to settle in and relax, because by the time we reach the final memory, the beloved and deeply missed Sunday drive, you might just find a beautiful tear in your eye. Life in the 1960s flowed at an entirely different pace. We lived in an era that was blissfully unhurried, long before the frantic rush of instant everything. Our families were not necessarily poor, but our parents were deeply careful. They lived with a profound respect for the things they owned, knowing that everything was built to last, including their relationships. There is a strange modern myth that without smartphones and endless conveniences, our lives must have been empty or emotionally poor. But you and I know the absolute truth. The lack of constant distraction meant that our lives were infinitely richer in genuine human connection. We understood the value of waiting, the joy of a quiet evening, and the deep, abiding security of a family that worked together to make ends meet. Let us remember together. The metal coffee can sitting quietly on the back of the stove. Do you remember it? It was usually an old Folgers or Maxwell House tin, completely repurposed for a very important mission. After breakfast, mother or grandmother would carefully lift the heavy black cast iron skillet and pour the hot, liquid bacon grease directly into that can. We never, ever threw it away. It was a golden treasure, a staple of 1960s American kitchens. That grease was the secret ingredient that made everything taste like home. A simple scoop of it would magically transform a pot of bland green beans into a savory masterpiece, or give the morning fried eggs those wonderfully crispy, lace-like edges that we all fought over. It was the ultimate act of frugality, yet it felt like culinary luxury. We understood instinctively that every single resource had value, and nothing was to be wasted. The rich, smoky aroma of that grease sizzling back to life in the pan is a scent that instantly transports us back to a simpler time. It was a warm, comforting smell that meant someone was taking care of us, making sure our bellies were full even when the household budget was extremely tight. Let us remember the lost art of darning socks. In today's world, a hole in the heel of a sock means an instant trip to the trash can. But back then, it meant it was time to bring out the sewing basket. Mother would sit in her favorite armchair under the warm yellow glow of the reading lamp, holding a wooden darning egg, or sometimes just a burnt-out light bulb, slipped inside the heel of the wool sock. We would sit on the rug, watching her hands move with steady, rhythmic precision. The needle would weave over and under, creating a perfectly neat little patch of woven threads. It was a quiet, peaceful ritual that taught us a fundamental lesson without a single word being spoken. We learned that when something is broken, you do not simply discard it, you take the time to fix it. You mend it with patience and care. The rough texture of the wool, the metallic glint of the needle, and the soft ticking of the mantel clock created a cozy atmosphere of security. Wearing those mended socks felt different. You could actually feel the little patch of extra thread against your skin, a physical reminder of your mother's love and her absolute dedication to making sure the family had exactly what it needed. There is a specific fragrance that no modern detergent or dryer sheet could ever possibly replicate, and that is the crisp, clean scent of laundry dried outside in the fresh sunshine. Every neighborhood had a network of clotheslines stretching across the backyards. On washing day, you could hear the distinct, rhythmic squeaking of the pulleys and the snap of damp cotton sheets catching the breeze. We would hand Mother the smooth wooden clothespins from a little cloth bag as she pinned up shirts, trousers, and heavy bath towels. It was hard, physical work, but the reward was absolutely extraordinary. When those sheets were finally taken down, stiff from the sun and the wind, they carried the very essence of the outdoors. Making the bed with them that night was a luxury. As you slipped under the covers, you could smell the ozone, the green grass, and the warmth of the summer afternoon.
This frugal habit saved electricity and money, certainly, but it also connected us to the rhythm of nature and the changing of the seasons. A rainy day meant hanging things in the damp basement, but a bright, breezy day was a beautiful gift from the heavens, a day when our clothes were infused with pure, natural joy. Let us talk about a completely unique currency of our childhood, the beloved S&H Green Stamps. Going to the grocery store or the filling station always ended with the cashier handing over a long strip of those little perforated stamps. The real magic happened at the kitchen table, where we would gather around with those thick, fascinating redemption catalogs. We would wet a little sponge in a dish to moisten the backs of the stamps, though sometimes we just used our tongues, enduring that distinct dry glue taste. Then we would carefully press them into the little booklets, watching the pages fill up one by one. It was a beautiful exercise in delayed gratification. We would spend months saving up those books, dreaming about the wonderful rewards. A new toaster for the kitchen, a set of sparkling drinking glasses, or perhaps, if we saved for a very long time, a brand new bicycle or a baseball mitt. When the day finally came to go to the Redemption Center, it felt exactly like walking into a treasure house. We had literally earned these beautiful new things simply by being loyal and patient. It was a brilliant, frugal system that turned everyday grocery shopping into a thrilling family project. Wearing hand-me-down clothing was an absolute certainty if you grew up with older siblings or cousins in the neighborhood. There was no shame in it whatsoever. In fact, there was a strange sort of pride in finally being big enough to fit into your older brother's corduroy jacket or your sister's beautiful Sunday dress. Clothes had a lifespan that far exceeded a single wearer. When the knees of our blue jeans inevitably wore thin from climbing trees and playing marbles on the sidewalk, Mother did not throw them away. She would pull out those oval-shaped iron-on denim patches. We can all still smell the unique, slightly acrid scent of the hot iron pressing down on that stiff fabric, sealing the patch onto the worn knee. Those patched jeans became badges of honor, absolute proof of an active, joyful childhood. We felt a deep connection to our siblings through these garments. A winter coat might have wrapped 3 different children in its warmth over the span of 10 years. It taught us to deeply respect our belongings, to keep them clean and folded, knowing that someone else would eventually inherit them. True wealth was not having a closet full of brand new clothes, but having a family that shared absolutely everything. The memory of a 1960s kitchen is inextricably linked to the magnificent scent of freshly baked bread. Long before the era of completely mechanized, store-bought loaves wrapped in soft plastic, many mothers dedicated a portion of their week to baking bread from scratch. It was a strict, frugal necessity, as flour and yeast were wonderfully cheap, but the result was a feast for the senses. We remember the dusting of white flour on the countertops, and the sight of Mother vigorously kneading the heavy dough, her hands working rhythmically, pushing and folding. Then came the agonizingly long wait while the dough sat in a greased bowl, covered with a damp tea towel, rising in a warm corner of the kitchen. When those loaves finally went into the oven, the aroma that filled the house was nothing short of heavenly. It was a rich, yeasty perfume that made your mouth water instantly. The moment the bread came out, piping hot with a thick golden crust, we would beg for the end piece. Slathering a thick pad of butter onto that steaming slice, watching it melt completely into the soft white crumb, was an experience of pure bliss. That simple, humble slice of bread felt like the richest, most decadent meal in the entire world. In our childhood homes, the journey of a glass jar never ended when the jelly or the mayonnaise was completely gone. Do you remember the heavy, beautifully decorated jelly jars that magically transformed into our everyday drinking glasses? Companies used to sell their jams in sturdy glasses painted with cartoon characters, dinosaurs, or beautiful floral patterns. Once the last scrape of grape jelly was washed away in the kitchen sink, that jar took its rightful place in the wooden cupboard. We drank cold milk, sweet iced tea, and tap water out of those wonderful, thick-rimmed glasses. There was a satisfying weight to them in your hand, a heavy sturdiness that modern plastic cups simply do not possess. When we reached into the cabinet, we always tried to grab our favorite character. It was a brilliant, unintentional recycling program that families embraced simply because it made perfect sense. Why buy a set of drinking glasses when the grocery store was practically giving them to you for free? Over the years, the colorful paint might have faded from running them through hot, soapy dishwater, but those mismatched glasses brought a quirky, colorful charm to our dinner tables that we still look back on with deep affection. Long before organic food became an expensive modern trend, having a vegetable garden in the backyard was just a normal, expected part of life. Born from the proud legacy of wartime victory gardens, our parents turned patches of suburban grass into thriving plots of tomatoes, green beans, cucumbers, and sweet corn. We remember the feeling of cool, dark soil under our bare feet and the rich smell of damp earth in the early morning. It was our daily chore to pull the weeds and pick the heavy red tomatoes off the vine. Summer evenings were often spent sitting on the front porch, a large bowl resting on our laps, snapping the ends off freshly picked green beans. And then came the absolute magic of canning season. The kitchen would turn into a sauna, filled with the loud, rhythmic hissing of the heavy pressure canner. Mother would meticulously fill row upon row of glass mason jars with vegetables, jams, and pickles to sustain us through the cold winter months. Walking down into the cellar and seeing those colorful, gleaming jars lined up perfectly on the wooden shelves gave us a profound sense of security. It was the vast wealth of the earth, captured and preserved by the hard, loving work of our own hands. Time seemed to move at a much more humane pace back then, largely because we simply walked everywhere we needed to go. Without the modern luxury of a multi-car family, our legs were our primary mode of transportation. We walked miles to school every morning, kicking pebbles along the sidewalk, carrying our heavy books in our arms. We walked to the neighborhood drugstore to buy a comic book, or down to the corner grocery to pick up a loaf of bread for Mother. We knew every single crack in the pavement, every friendly neighborhood dog behind a fence, and every shortcut through the dusty alleyways. You heard the scuffing of leather shoes on concrete, the rustle of autumn leaves underfoot, and the cheerful greetings of neighbors sitting on their front porches. Because we moved slowly through our environment, we actually saw the beautiful world around us. We noticed the change of the seasons, the blooming of the dogwood trees, and the shifting shadows of the afternoon. This frugal necessity of walking did not feel like a hardship. It felt like ultimate freedom. It gave us time to think, time to talk with our friends without interruption, and time to simply exist in the fresh air before the sun finally went down. There was an unspoken, ironclad law in almost every 1960s household, and it echoed down the hallways every evening. Turn off the lights when you leave a room. Our fathers used to remind us constantly that electricity did not grow on trees, and that the electric meter outside was spinning wildly every time we left a bulb burning in an empty bedroom. This strict adherence to energy conservation created a very specific, beautiful evening atmosphere in our homes. We did not live in houses blazing with unnecessary light from top to bottom. Instead, the family would gather together in the living room, illuminated by the warm, concentrated glow of a single floor lamp or a table lamp. The rest of the house would remain draped in quiet, peaceful shadows. This simple, frugal habit naturally drew us together into the exact same space. We would sit in that cozy circle of light, reading books, doing homework, or watching the television set together. The sharp, decisive click of the light switch being turned off was the comforting soundtrack of the evening. It taught us to be mindful of our consumption, but more importantly, it created a sense of intimate, shared warmth that modern, brightly lit homes often struggle to replicate. The glorious 1960s casserole was an absolute masterclass in culinary frugality and motherly ingenuity. Meat was terribly expensive, so finding ways to stretch a single chicken breast or a can of tuna to feed a hungry family of 5 was a strict daily necessity. The heavy glass Pyrex dish was the undisputed workhorse of the kitchen. Mother would combine noodles, rice, or potatoes with whatever leftover vegetables we had in the icebox. The secret weapon, of course, was always a simple can of condensed cream of mushroom or cream of chicken soup, which magically bound everything together into a rich, bubbling feast. We can still hear the wonderful sizzle of the casserole as it was pulled from the oven, the edges perfectly browned and crusted. Sometimes it was topped with a crunchy layer of crushed potato chips or fried onions, which felt like the absolute height of culinary luxury. When Mother scooped out a large, steaming portion onto your plate, the savory steam would rise up and fill your nose. It was not fancy food, but it was incredibly hearty and comforting. Those humble casseroles represented a profound kind of wealth, the ability to take very little and turn it into a hot, filling meal that brought the whole family around the dinner table. In our youth, footwear was a serious investment, not a cheap disposable commodity. When the thick leather soles of our school shoes finally wore completely through from miles of walking, or when the heavy heel of Father's work boot began to slant, we did not throw them into the garbage. Instead, we made a highly anticipated trip to the local shoe cobbler. Walking into that small, cluttered shop was a magnificent sensory overload in the best possible way. The air was thick and heavy with the rich, intoxicating smells of raw leather, dark shoe polish, and strong rubber cement. We would stand at the wooden counter, listening to the loud, rhythmic whirring of the buffing wheels and the sharp, rapid tapping of the cobbler's hammer, driving tiny metal nails into a fresh heel. The cobbler, wearing a thick, stained leather apron, would inspect the worn shoes with the experienced eye of a true craftsman, promising to have them ready by Tuesday. When we picked those shoes up, they looked and felt absolutely brand new, polished to a brilliant shine, ready to carry us for another entire year. It was a practice born of strict frugality, but it instilled in us a profound respect for skilled labor and taught us the immense value of maintaining and repairing the things we owned. The daily management of a baby's laundry in the 1960s was a monumental task of pure, unadulterated devotion. There were absolutely no convenient disposable plastic diapers to be easily tossed into the trash. Every single baby in the neighborhood wore thick, white, reusable cotton cloth diapers. We remember the sight of those large, intimidating safety pins with the brightly colored plastic heads. The process of cleaning them was an absolute labor of intense love. Mothers would stand over the hot stove or a large porcelain basin, boiling the heavy cotton squares to ensure they were perfectly clean and completely sanitary. Then, those bright white squares would be hung out on the clothesline, snapping loudly in the wind, acting as a universal flag announcing that a baby lived in the house. Folding them was a daily, repetitive chore, creating neat, incredibly soft stacks in the nursery. It required endless patience and exhausting physical effort. Yet, this incredibly frugal practice meant that raising a child did not create mountains of garbage. It was a simpler, much more sustainable way of living, driven by absolute necessity, but completely grounded in a mother's tireless care. The unbelievable softness of that washed cotton against a baby's skin was a gentle, tactile expression of pure love. Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations had a very distinct, careful rhythm when it came to opening presents. Unlike the chaotic, paper-tearing frenzy of today, opening a wonderful gift back then was an exercise in careful precision. Mother would always be hovering nearby, gently instructing us to be incredibly careful and not to tear the beautiful paper. We would meticulously peel back the sticky tape, trying our hardest to keep the paper completely intact. Once the new toy or the warm sweater was revealed, the paper was not crumpled up and thrown into a plastic trash bag. Instead, Mother would take the large sheets of festive paper, smooth out the creases with the flat of her hand, and fold them into neat, precise squares. These squares, along with the shiny ribbons and plastic bows, were carefully stored away in a large cardboard box under the bed or in the top of the hall closet, ready to be used again next year. When you received a gift, you might recognize the exact same beautiful silver bell wrapping paper from the previous Christmas. It was a deeply ingrained habit of saving pennies, but it also taught us to deeply appreciate the presentation, to value the beautiful things, and to make the magic of the holidays last year after wonderful year. True childhood imagination needs very little to thrive, and we proved that every single time a family in the neighborhood bought a new refrigerator or a heavy washing machine. The large, heavy-duty cardboard boxes those appliances came in were instantly claimed by the children, and they became the absolute most prized possessions on the entire street. We did not need expensive, battery-operated plastic toys to keep us deeply entertained. Armed with nothing but a pair of blunt scissors, a roll of tape, and a handful of thick wax crayons, we transformed those massive boxes into absolutely anything our minds could conjure. One afternoon, it was a heavily fortified castle. The next day, it was a sleek rocket ship soaring to the moon. And by the weekend, it was a cozy little house with square windows carefully cut out of the sides. We would sit inside our cardboard domain for hours, smelling the distinct, dusty scent of the corrugated paper. We drew elaborate dials, buttons, and control panels directly onto the cardboard walls. It was a purely frugal form of play, born of a time when entertainment was not handed to you on a glowing screen, but had to be built with your own two hands. That cardboard box provided a kind of rich, boundless joy that money simply could not ever buy. The simple kitchen chair served many wonderful purposes in our childhood, but once every few weeks it was completely transformed into a bustling neighborhood barber's chair. Going to a professional salon or barber shop was a rare luxury reserved for special occasions or the wealthy. For the rest of us, hair maintenance happened right on the kitchen linoleum floor. Mother or father would drape an old, slightly scratchy bath towel around our shoulders, fastening it tightly at the neck with a large safety pin or a wooden clothespin. We remember the cold, heavy metal of the manual clippers resting against the back of our necks, or the sharp, decisive snip of the sewing scissors trimming our bangs. We were told to sit perfectly still, staring straight ahead at the kitchen cabinets, while our parents concentrated deeply on making the sides even. Sometimes the result was a perfectly respectable haircut, and sometimes it was the infamous bowl cut, but we wore it with immense pride regardless. The sensation of the itchy little hairs falling down our backs and the final sweep of a soft brush across our necks are memories etched deep in our minds. It was a frugal tradition that saved money, but it also meant that even our physical appearance was a direct result of our parents' loving, extremely careful hands. In the sweltering, heavy heat of a 1960s summer, children rarely went inside the house until the streetlights finally flickered on. When we were running wildly through the neighborhood, playing hide-and-seek or riding our bicycles, we never carried plastic bottles of water. Thirst was quenched in the most magnificent, incredibly frugal way possible. We drank straight from the green rubber garden hose attached to the side of the house. We remember the distinct, rigid feel of the heavy brass nozzle in our hands. The first burst of water was always shockingly hot from baking in the afternoon sun, so we would let it run out onto the grass until it turned freezing cold. Then we would lean over, closing our eyes, and drink deeply from the heavy stream. It had a sharp, metallic, slightly rubbery taste that was, at that exact moment, the most delicious flavor in the entire world. Water dripped down our chins and completely soaked the collars of our cotton shirts, cooling us off instantly. There was a profound sense of absolute freedom in that simple act. We did not need to ask for permission or go indoors. The neighborhood was our entire world, and the garden hose was our reliable oasis, keeping us refreshed and entirely ready for the next great summer adventure. Communication in the 1960s required a level of deep patience and community awareness that is entirely lost today. Many families shared what was known as a party line,
a single telephone circuit connected to multiple houses in the neighborhood. Our homes had a heavy, solid rotary phone, usually black or olive green, sitting proudly on a small table in the hallway. When you picked up the heavy receiver to make a call, you might immediately hear the voices of your neighbors chatting away. You had to quietly hang up and wait your turn. When the line was finally free, dialing was a deliberate, incredibly tactile experience. You would place your finger in the circular hole, pull the heavy dial all the way clockwise, and listen to the rhythmic, mechanical clicking as it spun back into place. Because long-distance calls were incredibly expensive and local lines were shared, conversations were kept brief and deeply meaningful. We learned not to monopolize the telephone. Hearing the loud, jarring ring of the phone echoing through the house was a genuine event. It meant someone, somewhere, was specifically trying to reach you. We valued every single word spoken through that receiver, recognizing that the human connection itself was a deeply precious commodity. Preparing for a long day at school involved a very specific, comforting morning ritual surrounding our heavy, seemingly indestructible steel lunchboxes. There were absolutely no disposable plastic bags or individually wrapped pre-packaged snacks. Our lunchboxes were tough, solid metal containers, brightly painted with incredible images of cowboy heroes, astronauts, or popular television shows. The loud, metallic sound of that latch snapping open is a sound we will absolutely never forget. Inside, there was always a matching steel thermos with a delicate, fragile glass liner. Mother would carefully fill it with hot tomato soup or ice-cold milk, sealing it tight with a cork or a heavy plastic stopper. The food itself was simple and strictly economical. An apple and perhaps a bologna and cheese sandwich on white bread, meticulously wrapped in a square of crinkly, translucent wax paper. The wonderful smell inside that lunchbox was a unique combination of cool metal, wax paper, and sweet fruit. We carried those boxes by their plastic handles, swinging them as we walked to school. They dented when we dropped them, and the bright paint scratched over the years, but they survived our entire childhoods. That sturdy lunchbox was a daily, beautiful reminder that Mother had packed a piece of home to sustain us through the day. Perhaps the most beautiful and poignant frugal habit of all was the wonderful, traditional Sunday drive. After church and a hearty afternoon dinner, the whole family would pile into the heavy steel body of the family station wagon or sedan. There was no specific destination in mind, no expensive amusement park tickets to buy, and absolutely no rushing to be anywhere on time. Gasoline was incredibly cheap, making this the perfect, affordable family entertainment. We kids would slide across the wide vinyl bench seats, completely free to look out the windows. Father would roll the heavy windows down, letting the fresh air buffet our faces as we cruised along winding country roads or through quiet, tree-lined neighborhoods. The heavy engine hummed a steady, calming lullaby, and the radio played soft, crackling melodies from a local station. We would watch the world slowly pass by, pointing out horses in a field or admiring the architecture of old farmhouses. It was an hour or two of pure, uninterrupted togetherness. The golden light of the late afternoon sun would fill the car, warming our shoulders. We were perfectly content, moving forward together, realizing that simply being with our family was the absolute greatest adventure of all. As we look back on all of these beautiful, frugal memories, a profound truth begins to reveal itself. We do not really miss the heavy steel lunchboxes, the worn-out hand-me-down clothing, or the endless daily chores. What our hearts truly ache for is our youth. We miss that unparalleled sensation of moving slowly through a world where time felt completely endless, and where our genuine connection to one another was the absolute most valuable thing we possessed. We had less money in our pockets, but our days were overflowing with incredible purpose, resilience, and a deep, unconditional love. That was our true wealth. If these warm memories brought a smile to your face today, please do subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video, as it truly helps us keep these precious stories alive. And now, I would love to hear from you. What beautiful, frugal habit from your own childhood makes you smile the most? Please, sit down and write your personal story in the comments below. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never forget the beautiful history we all share.